In Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, beneath the Roman Temple of Jupiter, rest the Baalbek megaliths, humongous blocks of stone that defy every expectation people have about ancient construction. Some of these blocks weigh thousands of tons, but the real mystery is not their staggering size. It's the absolute precision with which they were cut, shaped, and fitted together that still puzzles our modern understanding. They have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the destruction of kingdoms, and centuries of natural disasters, yet the foundation remains standing. So what was the secret behind Baalbek's otherworldly construction? And why do these 1,000-ton walls still stand today? Before we get into it, if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, make sure you do. The megalith foundation beneath the Roman temple Baalbek is not the only place where such giant stones were used for construction, and blocks of otherworldly size were moved by many civilizations besides the Romans. The Olmecs of Central America transported huge stone heads across difficult terrain, using rivers and roots to move them far from their source. The Inca built mountaintop temples, cities, and fortresses from huge stones, fitted together with amazing precision. At Machu Picchu, much of the stone was quarried directly from the mountain itself, while at Ollantaytambo, traces of the route used to transport big blocks can still be seen across the valley today. On Easter Island, the famous moai were carved from single pieces of rock and moved across an isolated island with limited resources. But even among these unbelievable achievements, Baalbek presents a totally different kind of mystery. Here, the question is not simply how the stones were moved. It is why builders chose to work on such a scale in the first place. After all, the largest and heaviest stones at Baalbek were not carved into temples or monuments meant to impress those who saw them. They became part of a foundation. But did the Romans actually build this foundation? Archaeologists agree that the upper structures go back to around the 1st century AD. But the stones below tell a very different story. They appear to belong to a much older phase of construction, one that doesn't fit into the history of the Roman Empire. And the deeper experts look at it, the less Baalbek makes sense. The Trilithon and the impossible walls of Baalbek engineers, archaeologists, and historians still can't agree on how it's possible to cut, move, and position stones on the scale seen at Baalbek. While Heliopolis was once full of ancient temples of enormous proportions and residential complexes that were fit for kings, today you will see 3 megalithic stones at the base of the ruins of Jupiter Baal Temple. The colossal stones are called Trilithons, and by any measure, they rank among the largest stones ever used in construction. Each block weighs roughly 1,000 tons. To put that into perspective, the heaviest plane ever built was the Ukrainian Antonov An-225 Mriya. Without any cargo and fuel, it weighs 175 tons. But somehow, these stones were not only quarried and transported, but they were also raised several meters above the ground and fitted into a foundation wall with astonishing precision. Their surfaces look carefully shaped. Their corners are sharply defined. Their joints are so tight that even a piece of paper cannot fit between them. And as extraordinary as the Trilithon looks, it is not the largest stone connected to Baalbek. It's big, of course, but it's not the biggest one. Not far from the temple complex lies the ancient quarry where the stone was cut. There rests the famous Stone of the South, sometimes called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, a gigantic unfinished block estimated to weigh between 1,000 and 1,200 tons. For many decades, it was considered the largest stone ever quarried anywhere in the world. Then, archaeologists made an even more surprising discovery. Beneath it, hidden for centuries under layers of soil, was another unfinished monolith now, called Hajar al-Hibla II. This block is larger still, with an estimated weight of around 1,650 tons. Suddenly, the Trilithon no longer looked like the upper limit of what the builders could achieve. If anything, it suggested they were prepared to work with stones even larger. That raises a very difficult question. If blocks weighing around 1,000 tons were already being placed into the walls of Baalbek, why were stones weighing far more than that being cut in the quarry? What structure were they intended for? And what kind of construction project required blocks on such a scale in the first place? Even after centuries of earthquakes, invasions, and natural disasters, the foundation remains exactly where it was built. So, why these megalithic walls still stand today? The ancient builders who built these massive stone walls didn't use mortar, filler, or any other kind of binding material to hold the structure together. Well, that sounds like a weakness. After all, most people assume that the strength of a wall comes from whatever is holding the stones together. But Baalbek seems to follow a completely different philosophy. Instead of relying on mortar, the builders relied on the stones themselves. Every block was shaped to fit precisely against the next. The joints are so tight that there is almost no space between them. That may not sound particularly important until you consider what destroys most ancient structures. Water seeps into tiny cracks. Temperatures rise and fall. The ground shifts. Small weaknesses slowly become large ones. Over decades, centuries, and eventually millennia, entire structures begin to fail. Baalbek appears to have been designed with those problems in mind. The enormous weight of the stones presses each block firmly against its neighbors, creating a structure that behaves less like a collection of separate stones and more like a single mass. When earthquakes strike, the force spreads through the foundation instead of concentrating on one weak point. When storms pass through the region, there are few openings for water to work its way deep into the structure. Even time itself seems to have struggled to find a weakness. That becomes even more amazing when you consider what has happened around it. Empires rose and disappeared. Armies marched through the region. Powerful quakes damaged temples, columns, and buildings that once dominated the skyline. Parts of the Roman Baalbek collapsed, but the giant platform beneath it remained. And perhaps that tells us something important. The builders were not simply trying to create a foundation that would support the structures above. They were building for permanence. Every single decision, from the size of the stones to the precision of the joints, points toward a structure designed to endure for generations far beyond the people who built it. Which brings us back to the question that started this journey. Was the extraordinary scale of Baalbek simply a display of engineering skill? Or did its builders understand something about stone construction that later civilizations gradually forgot? A forgotten blueprint shared across the ancient world. Baalbek wasn't just built to last. It was built to say something. Something that may have been understood by the people who built it, but has become increasingly difficult for us to understand today. The more closely the site is examined, the more it begins to resemble something greater than a collection of walls, foundations, and temples. There is a sense of order running through the entire complex, not the kind of order created simply to support a structure, but the kind that appears when measurements, orientation, and design are working together toward a larger purpose. That is where Baalbek begins to raise a different kind of question. For centuries, people have focused on the size of the stones. They have debated how they were quarried, how they were transported, and how they were fitted together. Those questions remain important, but another mystery sits quietly in the background. Why was so much effort invested in creating something so precise? The same question appears at other ancient sites. Thousands of miles from Lebanon, the builders of Giza aligned their monuments with extraordinary accuracy. Across the Atlantic, the city builders of Teotihuacan arranged their structures according to a carefully planned layout. In Britain, Stonehenge was positioned in relation to the movement of the sun. Different cultures, different languages, different histories, yet the same attention to direction, measurement, and celestial events appears again and again. That repetition is difficult to ignore. These ancient builders were separated by oceans, deserts, mountain ranges, and vast stretches of time. But many of their most important structures seem to follow similar principles. They favored massive stone. They built with unusual precision. They paid close attention to the sky, and they often selected locations that remained important for centuries after the original builders were gone. At Baalbek, those patterns seem to converge. The foundation does not look like something assembled simply because it was practical. It looks planned, it looks deliberate, as though the builders were following rules that mattered just as much as the stones themselves. Some researchers believe those similarities are nothing more than a coincidence. Others argue that ancient civilizations simply arrived at the same solutions independently. But the comparisons continue to raise pretty disturbing questions because the pattern appears in place after place, often where no connection should exist. Perhaps that is why Baalbek remains so fascinating. The site forces us to consider a possibility that history rarely discusses. What if some knowledge traveled much farther than we realize? What if certain ideas survived the collapse of kingdoms and civilizations, passing from one generation to another until only fragments remained? If so, Baalbek may represent more than an engineering achievement. It may be one surviving piece of a much older story, one that stretches far beyond Lebanon and connects to monuments scattered across the ancient world. So, who actually built this place? The legend of giants and Baalbek construction, the megalithic stone at Baalbek, is proof that whoever planned this project believed moving and shaping stones of this size was possible. The unfinished blocks still resting in the quarry prove that these were not accidental cuts or abandoned experiments. They were part of a plan. A very ambitious one. Unfortunately, the stones reveal far more about what was achieved than how it was achieved. The quarry shows where the blocks came from. The foundation shows where many of them ended up. What happened between those 2 points remains one of the most debated parts of the entire Baalbek story. There are no surviving description that explains the process. No ancient engineer left behind a guide. No detailed record describes the machinery, techniques, or workforce involved. And when answers are missing, stories tend to fill the gap. For centuries, people looked at the enormous stones and reached a conclusion that seemed obvious to them. Human beings could not have done this alone. That belief gave birth to some of the most fascinating legends surrounding Baalbek. One tradition claims the site was built by not humans, but giants. There is another who links the construction to the Nephilim, the mysterious beings mentioned in ancient biblical texts. According to some stories, these giants raised the enormous stones before disappearing in a catastrophe that reshaped the world. Other legends connect Baalbek to Nimrod, the powerful ruler who ordered the construction of great cities after the earliest days of human history. But these strange stories do not stop there. Over the years, Baalbek has been connected to the Tower of Babel, Atlantis, and even visitors from beyond Earth. Some theories suggest advanced knowledge was shared with ancient civilizations. Others claim the site belonged to a forgotten civilization that existed long before recorded history began. Most of these ideas remain firmly in the realm of legend. But their popularity reveals something important. People are not drawn to these stories because they have proof. They are drawn to them because the stones themselves are difficult to ignore. Standing beside a block weighing well over 1,000 tons has a way of making ordinary explanations feel incomplete. Modern archaeology approaches the site from a very different direction. Researchers continue to search for practical answers rooted in engineering, geology, and ancient construction methods. But even among scholars, one point receives little argument. Baalbek is old. We mean very, very old. And the longer its history is studied, the more difficult it becomes to separate established facts from centuries of myth, speculation, and forgotten memories. Somewhere between those legends and the stones themselves lies the real story of Baalbek, a story that may be far more remarkable than either side imagines. So, what's your theory about the megalithic stone walls of Baalbek? Are we missing something? Let us know in the comments. And be sure to like this video and subscribe. Take care, and we'll see you later.